My name is William Thornton, and at 71 years old, I learned that the most dangerous signature of my life only took 4 seconds to write. My son handed me a few papers one cold morning and told me he only wanted to help manage things for me. 6 months later, every dollar of my pension was gone. I had buried my wife the year before. The house we built together was paid off. That money was all I had left to protect myself and leave something behind for my grandchildren. And the person who took it from me was my own boy. Then, in front of my whole family, he called me a confused old man who could not be trusted with his own money. What he did not know was that I still had an old friend at the bank, and she had been watching quietly. Before I take you back to what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to that cold January morning, the day I picked up the pen. 14 months had passed since Margaret died, and the kitchen table still did not make sense to me. She used to sit there every Sunday with her reading glasses low on her nose and a cup of black coffee beside her hand. The bills went in one pile, the bank statements went in another, and she would hum while she worked. By noon, everything was sorted, signed, stamped, and ready. After she was gone, that table was just paper, envelopes I had not opened, notices I did not understand. A second mortgage offer I had thrown into the corner because the words made my chest tight. I had been a carpenter for 43 years. I could build a staircase blindfolded, but Margaret had always handled the money, every cent of it. And she never once made me feel small for letting her do it. That Saturday, Marcus came by, my oldest, 43 years old now, with his mother's smile and his own quiet way of needing things. He looked at the table for a long moment, then set down 2 coffees and pulled out a chair. He told me he wanted to take some of it off my plate. I felt something loosen in my chest. Relief, maybe. Gratitude, maybe. The house had been so quiet for so long. I told him he did not have to do that. He said he wanted to. Then he reached over and squared up a stack of envelopes the way his mother used to. He told me I should not have to figure everything out alone, not now. He smiled the way she did, and I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted to believe him so badly that I did not ask a single question. I did not know yet that some kindness comes with a hook buried inside it, but I would find that hook soon enough. He came back the next week with a folder. It was a nice folder, leather, the kind you would see on a lawyer's desk. He set it down where Margaret's coffee cup used to sit and flipped it open like it was nothing. He told me it was just a few papers, only so he could help manage things without calling me for every little signature. I reached for my reading glasses, but he kept talking. He said the bank wanted the documents on file. He said it was standard. He said everybody did it once they reached a certain age. The pages were dense, full of small print, the kind that swims if you stare at it too long. I caught a few words. Authorization. Account holder. Durable. Power of attorney near the top of the 3rd page. Marcus slid a pen across the wood and told me to sign by the little flags. He had marked them all for me. I paused on that 3rd page. The words sat there, gray and official. I asked him what that part meant. He told me it was just so he could talk to the bank for me. He said it would save me a trip whenever my knees were acting up. He reminded me I hated that drive. He was right. I did hate that drive, and my knees had been bad all winter. Then Margaret's voice came to me, the thing she said near the end. She had told me to keep the family together, whatever happened. She made me promise. So I signed. 4 seconds per page, 4 little flags. The pen barely made a sound. Marcus closed the folder fast, almost before the ink dried, and tucked it under his arm. He grinned and said that was it, painless. I remember thinking how good it felt to be taken care of. 4 seconds. That was all it took to hand my son the keys to everything I owned. A few days later, I drove into town to pull out some cash. Millbrook is not much. 1 main street, a diner, a hardware store where I used to work weekends when my hands were young, and the bank, the same brick building that had been on the corner since before I was born. Ruth Calloway was at the counter like she had been for 30 years. She knew Margaret. They had sung in the same church choir for 2 decades. When my wife passed, Ruth was the one who brought a casserole and sat with me on the porch without saying a word for an hour. Some people understand that silence is its own kindness. When she saw me, she smiled and said my full name like she always did. Then she told me I looked thin and asked if I was eating. I said I was. She told me I was not. Then she slid the cash across and told me to bring her a list of my groceries the next week so she could fact-check me. I laughed for the first time in a while. She counted my 20s twice, slow and careful. Then she leaned in a little and told me the bank was watching accounts more closely these days, especially for people our age. She said there had been too many stories lately. I asked her what kind of stories. She said children, neighbors, people who got a little too helpful with someone else's money. She shook her head and told me the bank flagged certain things quietly now. It had become policy. I did not think much of it. I was thinking about the diner and whether I should get pie. Then Ruth added that Margaret would want her to keep an eye on me, so she would. I told her she did not have to. She said she knew she did not, and that was how I knew she meant it. I drove home with cash in my pocket and pie on the seat. I had no idea those few words of hers would matter more than anything I owned. Sunday dinner was at my house, like always. Marcus came with Sandra, his wife, and their 2 kids. Grace came too, my youngest, driving 2 hours from the city the way she always did. She was 35, sharp as a tack, and she had never once let anyone finish a lie in front of her. Sandra set the table and talked the whole time. She had a way of talking about the future like it had already been decided. While passing the potatoes, she said they had been thinking long-term about what was best for everyone as a family. Grace asked what that meant. Sandra smiled and said it meant looking after me. Then she looked at Marcus and asked him if they only wanted what was best for me. Marcus nodded into his plate and said, "Of course they did." Grace set down her fork. She was watching her brother the way a hawk watches tall grass. She asked what looking after me meant exactly. Marcus said it was just helping with things. The table got quiet. I filled the silence the way I always did, with something dull about the weather, and the moment passed. But after dinner, while I rinsed plates, Grace came into the kitchen and stood close. She asked me in a low voice whether I had read the papers Marcus had me sign. I told her he had explained them. She said that was not what she had asked. Then she put her hand on my arm and asked again if I had read them. I looked at the suds on my hands. I thought about the small print that swam in front of me, the third page, the gray official words I had skimmed past. I told her he was my son. She said that was not an answer either, and for the first time, a cold little thread of worry stitched itself through me. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong about that too. Let me tell you what that money meant, so you understand what was at stake. The pension was not big. 41 years at the lumber mill in the carpentry trade got me a check on the first of every month. It was enough to cover the taxes, the heat, the groceries, and a little left over for the grandkids on their birthdays. It was the only income I had. There was nothing behind it. No savings account fat enough to catch me if it fell away. And then there was the house. I had built half of it with my own hands. Margaret picked the spot, up on the rise where you can see the whole valley turn gold in October. We paid the mortgage for 30 years and burned the papers in the backyard the night we finished. The grandkids roasted marshmallows over the ashes. That house was supposed to go to them. It was the one thing I would leave behind that said William Thornton was here, and he built something that lasted. I kept a notebook about all of it. It was an old habit from the mill. Every bill, every payment, every account number written in pencil, in a little spiral pad I kept in the kitchen drawer. Margaret used to tease me for it. She would say nobody read those things. I would tell her I read them. That notebook was nothing then, just an old man's scribbles. It would turn out to be the most important thing in the house, because a pension and a paid-off home are only safe as long as the person holding the pen wants them to be, and I had just handed my pen to someone else. I did not know it yet, but the first crack was already running through everything I owned. The first crack showed itself at the hardware store. I had gone in for a box of wood screws and a new blade. Tom rang me up, and I swiped my card the way I had done 1,000 times. It beeped. Tom told me to try it again. I tried it again. Declined. My face went hot. There were 2 men behind me in line, fellows I had known for 40 years. I dug out cash and counted it slowly with hands that had started to shake. Tom told me the machine had been acting up all day. He lied kindly. We both knew it had not. I called Marcus from the truck and told him my card had been declined at Tom's in front of everybody. He did not even pause. He said he had switched some accounts around to make things cleaner, and something had probably crossed a wire. He told me not to worry, that he would handle it. I asked him what he had switched around. He said it was just account stuff, that it was complicated, and that he had it. His voice was smooth as a plain board. He told me I did not need to be driving all over town stressing about it. He told me to let him take care of me. I hung up and sat in the truck for a long time. Let me take care of you. He had said it so many times by then, it used to sound like love. That night, I could not sleep. I lay there in the dark on my side of the bed, the side I still kept to out of habit, and I listened to the house tick and settle. Something Margaret always said came back to me. She had said it about a contractor who cheated us once, years ago. When a man keeps telling you not to worry, start worrying. By morning, I decided to drive to the bank myself. Right about here, I almost stopped asking questions. Maybe you have been there too. That moment when you sense something is wrong, but you do not want it to be true. So you tell yourself a softer story. I am an old man. Old men make mistakes. Maybe it was nothing. But if this story is pulling you in, hit subscribe so you can see how it ends. Stay with me, because what I found out next changed everything. Across town at that same hour, Ruth Calloway sat at her terminal and frowned at a large transfer, leaving the Thornton account. She circled the date on a notepad. She was at the counter when I walked in. One look at my face, and she stopped smiling. I told her I needed to check my balance because something was wrong with my card. She typed, then she went still. Her eyes moved across the screen, line by line, and I watched her jaw tighten. She said my name quietly and told me to come around the side so we could use her desk. I followed her behind the counter. She pulled up a chair for me and angled the monitor so I could see. The checking account had $11 in it. $11. I stared at it like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. I told her that was not right. My pension came in on the 1st. There should have been more. Ruth scrolled and told me it had come in, then gone right back out the same day. I asked if it had gone to another account. She kept scrolling, transfer after transfer, withdrawals I had never made. A pattern of money flowing out, steady, for months, like water finding a crack in a dam. She asked who had access to the account besides me. I told her my son, Marcus, had been helping me manage things. Ruth did not answer right away. She printed a few pages, the machine grinding in the quiet. Then she folded her hands and looked at me, with 30 years of bank counter in her eyes. She asked how much of it I had actually authorized. I opened my mouth. Then I closed it. The honest answer was 4 seconds and 4 little flags. I told her I did not know. And the look that crossed her face told me I was in far deeper trouble than I had let myself imagine. Ruth gave me a name, Daniel Pierce, an elder law attorney 2 doors down from the diner. She called ahead herself. I sat across from him an hour later with the leather folder Marcus had left a copy of and the pages Ruth had printed. Pierce read slowly. He was a big man with reading glasses low on his nose, and he did not rush. When he reached the 3rd page, he tapped it and told me I had signed a durable power of attorney. He asked if I knew what that meant. I told him Marcus said it was so he could talk to the bank for me. Pierce said it was more than that. He set the page down flat and told me it gave Marcus authority to act as me, move money, open accounts, and borrow against assets. Then he paused and said that included my house. For a moment, the room felt very far away. I repeated the words, my house. Pierce said he would check the county records. He turned to his computer and typed. The seconds stretched out. Then his face changed, just slightly, the way a doctor's does when he sees the scan. He told me there was a new lien on the property, a mortgage taken out 3 months earlier. 1 signature, 4 seconds. I had handed my son my entire life, and he had quietly carried it off piece by piece while telling me not to worry. I felt something I had not felt since the funeral. Not anger. Not yet, just a deep cold falling through me. I asked Pierce if there was anything I could do. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. He took off his glasses and looked at me directly. He told me this was reversible. He said I still had full mental capacity, and that changed everything. But he said we had to move carefully, and we had to move quietly. I asked why quietly. Pierce said that if Marcus panicked, he could do a lot more damage before we stopped him. I did not take Pierce's advice at first. He was the lawyer, but Marcus was my son, and a father wants to believe there is a reason. I drove to Marcus's house that evening. Sandra answered the door, and her smile flickered when she saw my face. Marcus came to the kitchen. I laid the printed pages on his counter and told him there were $11 in my account. He glanced at the pages. He did not even pretend to be surprised. He told me not to make it harder than it needed to be. He said it was an investment. He spread his hands and said he was growing the money, that I did not understand how those things worked anymore, and that the whole point of him helping was because I could not manage it myself. I told him I built that house. He told me I could not even read a bank statement. He said it gently, which was somehow worse. Then he told me to be honest, that Mom had done all of it, and I was lost without her. He said everybody could see it. Sandra stepped in beside him with her hand on his arm and told me they were protecting me. She said someday I would thank them. I looked at the two of them lined up in their bright, clean kitchen, so sure of themselves. I am not a loud man. I never have been. But something in me went very still and very steady. I told Marcus I built that house with my hands, and I could read a bank statement. He sighed like I was a child refusing supper, and told me again not to make it harder than it needed to be. I left without raising my voice. I drove home past the dark fields, past the church where Margaret used to sing, "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." He had no idea. I was about to make it exactly as hard as it needed to be, and not 1 inch harder. The full weight of it arrived 2 days later in an envelope. It was from the mortgage lender, a statement. The first payment was due on a loan I had never asked for, secured against the house I built. I sat at Margaret's table and read it 3 times. The number at the bottom was more than my whole pension for a month, and there was a line near the top I kept coming back to. In the event of default, the lender may initiate foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. On the rise where you can see the valley turn gold. The house with the marshmallow ash still in the fire pit. I was 71. If I lost that house, there was no starting over. No second mortgage on a younger man's salary. There was a rented room somewhere, or worse, and the slow understanding that everything I had built had been carried off by the boy I taught to hammer his first nail. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt truly afraid. Not embarrassed. Not hurt. Afraid in the animal way, the way you feel when the ground itself stops being solid. I called Grace. I did not plan to. The phone was just in my hand. She heard it in my voice instantly, and asked what had happened. I told her he had mortgaged the house. I told her the pension was gone. I told her there were $11 left. Only 11. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had changed into something hard and clear. She told me she was coming home that night. She told me not to sign anything, not to talk to Marcus, and to wait for her. I sat in the dark kitchen with the foreclosure notice in my hand and waited for my daughter. Outside, headlights swept the road, slowed at my drive, and kept going. Just a neighbor. But my heart did not settle for a long while. Ruth called the next morning and asked me to come to the bank before it opened. She let me in through the side door. The lobby was dark and quiet, just the two of us and the smell of old paper and coffee. She told me she wanted to show me something, and then she wanted to tell me what we could do. She laid printouts across her desk, dates circled in red ink going back months. She said she had started noticing the transfers in March. Large transfers. Regular as clockwork. Often to an account belonging to a man she knew was newly widowed. It had not sat right with her, so she had done what she was trained to do. She flagged them. I asked who she had flagged them to. She told me the bank had a protection unit for older customers. They had started the policy 2 years earlier. after the laws tightened up. She tapped a page and told me every transfer was documented, time-stamped on the bank's own records. It was not my word against Marcus's. It was the bank's word. I stared at the rows of red circles. All those months, while Marcus told me not to worry, this quiet woman had been watching the whole thing happen and writing it down. Then, she said there was more. As the account holder, I had a legal right to demand a full accounting of everything done under that power of attorney, in writing. Marcus would be required by law to answer, and if he could not, then it was all right there. Ruth squared the pages and told me I did not need to trick anybody. I only needed to ask the right question on paper and let the record speak. I looked at her, this friend of my wife doing all this without being asked, and I asked why she was helping me like that. Ruth's eyes went soft. She said Margaret had been her friend, and she was not going to stand there and watch that happen to me. Grace got to the house that night and did not even take off her coat before she started. She spread Pierce's notes and Ruth's printouts on the table side by side and read them with a pen in her hand, like she was studying for an exam. Finally, she told me she needed me to hear something about Marcus, and she needed me not to defend him for 1 minute. I sat down. Grace told me his landscaping business was failing, and had been for a year. He was behind on everything. And Sandra was pregnant again. Their third child was due in the spring. I said he had never told me any of that. Grace said, of course he had not. Her voice cracked just slightly. She said the story Marcus told himself was that he was not taking from me, not really. He was only taking his inheritance early, getting it now instead of later. She said that was how people talk themselves into things like that. They decided your money was already theirs. I thought about Marcus's kitchen, the bright clean counters, and the new truck in the driveway I had not let myself wonder about. I said slowly that he was drowning. Grace agreed. She said he was drowning, and he was grabbing onto me to stay up. She told me he was not helping me. He was pulling me under with him. She put her hand over mine. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. She told me she loved her brother, but she loved me more, and what he was doing was a crime. We were not going to pretend it was not. I sat there for a long moment with my daughter's hand on mine, and the red-circled pages glowing under the kitchen light. Drowning men deserve a rope. I would give Marcus one. I was his father, but I was not going to let him pull me under to save himself. I told Grace all right. Then I asked her to tell me what we had to do. We spent the next week building it piece by piece, the way I would build a cabinet. Measure twice, cut once. I got my notebook out of the kitchen drawer, the little spiral pad Margaret used to tease me about. Every payment, every account number, every balance. Written in pencil over the years in my own slow hand. Grace laid it open next to Ruth's bank records, and we matched them line by line. My notebook said the pension was sound in December. The bank records showed it draining in January. 2 sources, the same story. My memory against his lies, with the numbers backing me up. Pierce drew up 2 documents. The first was a formal demand for a full accounting under the power of attorney. Legally, Marcus had to respond. Every dollar moved, explained in writing. The second was a revocation. Because I still had my mind, I had the absolute right to take that power back whenever I chose. With a signature and a notarized filing, the authority I had given away in 4 seconds would be gone. Pierce said we would file the revocation, serve the demand, and the bank would freeze Marcus's access the same hour. He would not be able to move another cent. I noticed something then. Not once had anyone suggested I trick him, trap him, or record him. No hidden schemes. Just paper, law, and the truth I had been writing down for years without knowing why. Grace asked when we were going to do it. I thought about Marcus standing in his bright kitchen, so sure I was lost without Margaret. Then I told her not yet. She and Pierce both looked at me. I had an idea forming, and it tasted like cold iron. I told them Marcus liked an audience, so we would wait for the right one. Marcus must have felt the ground shifting, because he started moving first. It began with little things. A cousin called to ask if I was doing okay. Really okay. An aunt I had not spoken to in months left a worried voicemail. My neighbor mentioned gently that he had heard I had been having some confusion lately. I sat with that one a while. Marcus was building a story. Not that he had taken the money. No, he was saving me from myself. The forgetful old widower who could not be trusted. The man who needed his good son to step in and take the wheel. Grace heard the same thing from her end. She told me Marcus was calling everyone, telling them I was slipping, paranoid, imagining things. He was setting it up so that when I accused him, I would sound exactly like the confused old man he had been describing. It was clever. I will give him that. He was a better planner than I had ever given him credit for. He was poisoning the well before I could drink from it. A younger man might have run around the family defending himself, calling every relative, sounding more frantic with every call, proving Marcus's point for him. I did not do that. Sandra called once, sweet as syrup. She said they were just so worried about me, that I seemed so agitated lately, and maybe I should see someone. I told her maybe I should and thanked her for caring. She did not know what to do with that. The line went quiet. I hung up and stood in the kitchen, calm as still water. Marcus was building a story about me, brick by brick, a story where he was the hero and I was the problem. So I decided to do the one thing he would not expect. I decided to let him finish it. I decided to let him say every word out loud in front of everyone. The chance came in the form of an invitation. Sandra called to invite me to an anniversary party at their house. Marcus and Sandra, 15 years married. The whole family would be there. Both sides, a few neighbors, a real gathering. Sandra said it would mean so much to Marcus if I came, because family was everything to him. I almost laughed at that, but I kept my voice warm and told her I would not miss it. When I hung up, Grace was watching me from the doorway. She asked if I was actually going. I told her I was. She warned me that Marcus was going to use that party. She said he was going to stand up in front of everyone and announce he was taking over. He had told Aunt Carol he was going to address the family situation. I was the situation. I told Grace I knew, and that was exactly why I was going. Marcus wanted a room full of family to witness him stepping up to save his poor, confused father. He wanted an audience for his kindness. I would give him his audience. I would just give them the truth along with it. I called Pierce. I called Ruth. I asked them both to come quietly as my guests. I asked Pierce to bring the revocation, signed and notarized. I asked Ruth to bring the bank's records, the ones with the red circles. Then I told Ruth one thing first. I did not want Marcus moving another dollar before then. She told me it was already handled. She had put a hold on his access that morning. The flag gave her cause. He was locked out as of that day. Nothing would move until I said so. That settled the last of my worry. The bleeding had stopped. Now I could choose the moment. Pierce asked if I was sure about doing it in a public setting, because it could get ugly. I told him Marcus had chosen the setting. I was only accepting the invitation. That night, I sat at Margaret's table with her photograph propped against the salt shaker. I looked at her for a long time. I told her I was not doing it out of hate. I was doing it because a man should be able to stand up in his own family and not be carried off like furniture. I was not angry anymore. I was certain. The night before the party, I could not sleep. So I did what I always do when my mind will not quiet. I went to the workshop. The garage still smelled like sawdust and linseed oil. My tools hung on the pegboard where they had hung for 40 years, each one in its place, each outline traced in marker, so I would know if one went missing. I ran my hand along the workbench. I built the year Grace was born. Everything in that room, I had made or earned. Nobody handed it to me. Nobody could talk me out of it with smooth words and a leather folder. I thought about Marcus as a boy, 8 years old, standing right there while I guided his small hands around a hammer. The pride on his face when the nail went straight, where had that gone? When did my son decide that the easiest path to what he wanted ran straight through his father? I did not have an answer. Maybe there is not one. Maybe good people just talk themselves down a bad road, one small step at a time, until they are somewhere they never meant to be. I was not going to that party to ruin him. I want to be clear about that to you. The way I was clear with myself that night, I was going to stop him. There is a difference. A man can stop a thing from happening without setting fire to everything around it. I picked up my little spiral notebook off the bench and slid it into my coat pocket. 40 years of careful pencil marks, my memory in my own hand. The next day, I would set it on the table next to the bank's records and the lawyer's papers, and I would finally ask my son to explain himself in front of everyone. The party was already loud when I arrived. Marcus's house glowed. Cars lined the drive, and right at the front where everyone would see it sat his new truck. Cherry red, chrome wheels, dealer plate still on, $40,000 of it parked like a trophy. I knew where the down payment had come from by then. I parked my old pickup behind it. Inside, the family filled the big open kitchen and spilled into the yard. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, kids underfoot. Sandra worked the room in a new dress. Marcus stood at the center of it, a beer in his hand, laughing too loudly, the host of everything. He spotted me, and his face did something complicated. A flash of surprise, then a wide, careful smile. He crossed the room and clapped my shoulder, performing for the crowd. He told everybody to look who was there. A few people glanced over with a soft, pitying look I had come to recognize. The look you give a man who is not quite all there. Grace arrived a minute behind me and squeezed my hand once. Then through the front door came Ruth Calloway in her Sunday coat. Behind her came Daniel Pierce in a gray suit with a leather case. Marcus frowned at them and asked if they were friends of mine. I told him they were, and said I hoped it was all right that I had brought guests. He said of course, but his eyes lingered on Pierce's case for just a second before the smile came back. Then he moved to the center of the room. He set down his beer. He picked up a spoon and tapped it against his glass. 3 bright rings cut through the noise. The room began to quiet. Faces turned. Marcus said that before we ate, he had an announcement. It was about me. The kitchen went still, and I felt the whole thing tip toward its edge. I am going to stop right here at the worst possible moment, because I want to say something to you. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, written off as too old, too soft, too far past your prime to matter, then this next part is for you. I know that feeling. The feeling of being talked about in the third person while you are standing right there. Hit that like button so more people who need to hear this can find it. Now take a breath with me. Let me tell you exactly what my son said next, and exactly what I did when he finished. Marcus raised his glass and looked around the room like a man about to do something noble. He began by saying that, as most of them knew, we had lost Mom the year before, and it had been hard on all of us, but he said it had been hardest on me. Heads nodded. Someone murmured, "Poor William." Marcus went on, his voice dripping with sorrow. He said I was not the man I used to be. He said I had been forgetful, confused about money. He even told everyone that the month before, I could not use my bank card at the hardware store in front of everybody. My face burned. People I had known my whole life looked at the floor. Marcus said he had been trying to help me quietly, managing my accounts and protecting me. But it had gotten to the point where I could not really handle my own affairs anymore. So he had made a decision as my son, out of love. He paused for effect. Sandra dabbed her eyes. Then he said he was going to take full control of my finances and my property for my own good, so none of them had to worry about me being taken advantage of. Taken advantage of. The nerve of it nearly knocked the breath out of me. A cousin reached over and patted my arm. She whispered that it was the right thing and that I should let the boy help me. Around the room, I saw it settle into their faces. Sympathy. Agreement. The story Marcus had spent weeks planting had taken root. To every person there, I was a sad, fading old man, and my son was a hero. Marcus looked at me with wet, triumphant eyes and told me he knew it was hard, but somebody had to step up. The room waited for me to nod, maybe to weep, maybe to thank him. Then I stood up. I set my coffee down on the counter, slow and steady, and the room went very, very quiet. I told Marcus he was right. My voice carried farther than I expected. Calm. Clear. Not the voice of a confused old man. I watched a flicker of confusion cross my son's face when he heard it. I told him somebody did have to step up. I let that sit. Then I said that today, that somebody was me. I reached into my coat and took out my notebook. Then I nodded toward the door and told the room I had brought 2 guests that night. Some of them did not know them. I introduced Ruth Calloway and said she had worked at the bank in town for 30 years. Then I introduced Daniel Pierce and said he was an attorney. The room's temperature changed. You could feel it. Pierce stepped forward and set his leather case on the kitchen island, right where Marcus had been holding court. He clicked it open. I turned to Marcus and told him he had told everyone there that I could not manage my own money. So we were going to manage it right then, together, in front of the family he had invited. Marcus's smile was still on his face, but it had stopped meaning anything. It just hung there. He asked what it was. Not quite a question. I told him it was me asking him to explain something. I opened my notebook to the page I had marked. I said that in December, my pension account was whole, every dollar, and I had it written right there in my own hand. Then I turned to Ruth and asked her to tell everyone what happened to that account in January. Ruth stepped up beside me, calm and certain, holding the bank's records. She said she would be glad to. Marcus set down his glass. His hand was shaking now, just slightly. He said it was ridiculous and looked around the room for the sympathy that had been there a minute earlier. He said I was confused and did not know what I was doing. I told him to let her finish. He had had his turn. Ruth laid the printouts on the island one after another, like a dealer turning cards. In the steady voice of a woman who had counted other people's money for 30 years, she said that on January 1st, my pension was deposited $2,100. By that afternoon, it had been transferred out to an account held by Marcus Thornton. She set down the next page and said the same pattern had repeated every month since. February, March, April, page after page. Then Ruth said the bank's automated system had flagged the transfers back in March because they matched the profile of financial exploitation of an older customer. The bank had been documenting them ever since. A cousin leaned in to look, then another. The pitying faces from a minute ago were turning into something else. Reading, understanding. Ruth said there was more. In April, a mortgage had been taken out against my home, $45,000, authorized under a power of attorney. Then she looked up and said I had told her I never agreed to any mortgage. I told the room I did not know what I was signing. He had told me it was so he could talk to the bank for me. That was all I knew. Now, Pierce spoke, his voice even and final. He said that as of 9 o'clock that morning, the power of attorney had been formally revoked and the revocation filed with the county. He said I had full legal capacity, and my right to revoke was absolute. As of that morning, Marcus Thornton had no authority over my accounts or my property. None. The whole room turned slowly to look at Marcus, the new truck in the driveway, the bright clean kitchen, the party. Every eye in the family did the same arithmetic at the same time, and I watched the sympathy drain out of their faces and pool around my son's feet. Sandra had gone white as a sheet. Marcus said, "Dad," and his voice broke on the word. He told me I did not understand. He said he had been going to pay it all back. An uncle repeated the words, "Pay it back," disgusted. Marcus said he was going to. He turned in a slow circle, looking for one friendly face and finding none. Then he said the business was gone. It was gone. He was 6 months behind on everything. Sandra was pregnant. He had 2 kids and one coming, and he had not known what else to do. There it was, the whole sad truth spilling out in front of the people he had wanted to impress. He was not a monster. I want you to understand that because it matters. He was a frightened man who had made a terrible choice and kept making it, one small step at a time, until he was standing in his own kitchen with his life coming apart in front of everyone he knew. I told him he could have told me. My voice was not hard then. I told him he could have come to me as my son and said he was drowning. I would have helped him. I would have given him what I could. Marcus said he could not. I told him that instead, he had decided I was already finished. I stepped closer. I told him he had decided my money was his to take, and then he had told everyone I had lost my mind, so they would let him take it. He could not look at me. I told him I was not doing it to ruin him. My voice was quieter now, just for him. I told him I was doing it so he could not ruin himself and pull me down with him. His eyes came up, red and wet. He whispered, and asked what happened now. The room held its breath, and I told him the one thing he never expected to hear. The thing that surprised even Grace, who knew everything I had planned. I reached out and put my hand on my son's shoulder. Then I told him what would happen. I kept my hand on his shoulder while the whole family watched. I told him the bank would reverse what it could. The mortgage would get unwound. The power of attorney was gone for good. That was already done. Marcus nodded, miserable. I told him that as for the rest of what he had taken, he was going to pay it back on a schedule, in writing. Mr. Pierce had drawn up an agreement. He would sign it and make it right, dollar by dollar, however long it took. Marcus asked what would happen if he did not. He did not sound defiant. He sounded lost. I told him that then, it stopped being a family matter, and started being a police matter. I said it plainly, no threat in it, just the truth. What he had done was a crime. He would lose everything, and his children would have to visit him somewhere with bars. Sandra made a small sound. I told Marcus I was not going to do that, not that day, because he was my son, and because 2 of those children were my grandchildren, and I would not take their father from them over money. The relief that crossed his face nearly broke me. But then I told him to understand me. I took my hand back. I straightened up, all of me, and looked him in the eye. I told him I would help him as my son, but I would not be managed by him. I would not be talked about like furniture, and I would never again hand him my name. The kitchen was silent. 40 years of family, and you could have heard a pin drop. I asked Marcus if he understood. He looked at me, and something in him gave way. He nodded and said, "Yes, sir." It was the first true thing he had said all night. I picked my notebook back up off the island and slid it into my pocket. It took months to undo what 4 seconds had done. Pierce worked with the bank, and the bank worked with the lender. It was not automatic. The lender wanted proof. Marcus had to sign a sworn statement admitting the mortgage had been taken without my knowledge or consent. Faced with the fraud claim and possible charges, he signed it. Once a loan is built on fraud, the lender would rather unwind it than defend it in court. The lien came off the house in early autumn. I burned that paper in the fire pit too, alone this time, and watched the smoke go up over the valley. The pension was harder. The money already spent was spent, but the monthly drain stopped the day the power of attorney was revoked. From then on, every dollar came to me and stayed with me. For the rest, Marcus signed Pierce's agreement. A repayment schedule, notarized, real. $300 a month, every month, for as long as it took. The first payment was late. 3 days late. And I will be honest, those 3 days told me something. I sat by the phone and wondered if I had been a fool twice. Grace wanted me to call Pierce, start the charges, and be done with it. I told her to give him until Friday. 1 chance, not 2. The check came Thursday with a note I did not read until later. It said he was sorry it was late, and it would not be again. It was not. It is not fast. It may not finish in my lifetime. But that was never the point. I sat with my notebook one evening, and added up what I had recovered and what I had lost. The numbers were not perfect. I was poorer than I had been before that cold January morning. But the house was mine, the pension was mine, and my name was mine again, free and clear. Grace came by most weekends that fall. We would sit on the porch and not say much, the way Ruth and I had after the funeral. Some silences are full. Grace told me once that I had done it the right way. She said I could have ruined Marcus, but I did not. I told her he was still my boy. She said she knew, and that was what made it the right way. But money was not the only thing that had to be settled between Marcus and me. The family sorted itself out in the weeks after the party, the way families do, quietly, and without anybody announcing it. The cousins who had patted my arm and called me confused came around one by one with sheepish apologies. The aunt who had left the worried voicemail brought a pie and did not quite meet my eyes. I let it go. People believe the story they are told until they are shown a better one. I have been guilty of that myself. Sandra, I saw only once more that year. She and Marcus were strained. Anyone could see it. Whatever she had whispered to him about my money being theirs eventually, she did not whisper it where I could hear anymore. Marcus and I found a new shape to things. Careful. Honest. He would drop off his payment in person on the first of the month, and we would stand in the driveway and talk for a few minutes. The weather, the kids, never the thing itself. Not yet, maybe someday. One afternoon, he lingered by his old sedan. He had sold the red truck. Smart of him. He looked at his shoes and told me he kept waiting for me to hate him. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told him I did not hate him. I said I had been his age once, scared about money and too proud to ask. Then I shook my head and told him I just would not have done it to my father. He said he knew, and his voice was rough. He said he was going to spend a long time being sorry. I told him to spend it being better instead. Sorry was cheap. Better cost something. He almost smiled. He got in his car and said he would see me on the 1st. I told him I would see him on the 1st. I watched him drive off down the road, past the church, into the gold October light. My son. Still my son. Just not my keeper. I went to see Ruth at the bank on a Tuesday, during the slow part of the morning, and I brought her something. It was a small wooden box, walnut, dovetailed corners, with a brass hinge. I had made it in the workshop over a few evenings, the way I used to make things for Margaret. I had carved Ruth's initials into the lid. She turned it over in her hands and told me I did not have to do that. I borrowed her own words back and told her I knew I did not, and that was how she knew I meant it. She laughed, but her eyes were wet. I told her she had saved my house. She had saved everything I had. A stranger would have processed those transfers and gone to lunch. She did not. She set the box down carefully on the counter and told me she wanted to tell me something, and she wanted me to hear it. She said I did not need saving. Not really. I had the notebook. I had my wits. I had a daughter who would walk through fire for me. She tapped the counter and said all she did was hand me the truth and step out of the way. I told her that was not nothing. She agreed that it was not. But the standing up, the staying calm in that kitchen full of people, the not ruining my boy when I had every right to, that was all me. Then she said Margaret would have been proud. That got me. I had to look out the window for a minute. I told Ruth that Margaret would have handled it better than I did. Ruth said no. Margaret would have handled it her way, and I handled it mine. Both were good ways. I left the bank with my hands empty and my chest full. Some debts you cannot pay back. You can only pass them on. That winter, I learned some things a man my age is not supposed to bother learning. Grace sat with me at the kitchen table, Margaret's table, and showed me how to check my accounts on a computer. The little screen still feels like a foreign country, but I can find my way around it now. I can see every dollar come in and every dollar go out the same morning it happens. No surprises, not anymore. Pierce helped me set up a new power of attorney, a real one this time, the kind I understood completely before I signed. It takes two people to act on it, Grace and a trusted attorney both. And it cannot be used at all unless a doctor first says, I genuinely cannot manage on my own. There is oversight built into every line. Pierce called it belt and suspenders. I called it never again. Pierce told me most people never fix this until it is too late, and that I was doing it right. I keep my notebook in the drawer, still, old habit, but now there is a folder beside it, neat and labeled with copies of everything. The revocation, the repayment agreement, the bank's records. Grace made me 3 copies and put one in her own house, just in case. The house is safe, the pension comes in and stays. On the 1st of every month, $300 arrives from Marcus, and I put every cent of it into an account for the grandchildren, the ones who will get the house someday after all. I did not tell Marcus that is where it goes. He does not need to know. Some kindnesses you do quietly. I sit at that table on Sunday mornings now with black coffee, the way Margaret used to. The bills in one pile, the statements in another. I hum sometimes. I sort it all myself. People ask me, when they hear the story, whether I am angry, whether it ruined things between me and my son for good. The honest answer is no, on both counts. I am not angry anymore. Anger is a young man's fuel, and I burned mine off years ago. What I feel now is something steadier. The quiet of a man who got pushed to the wall and found out the wall would hold. Here is what I learned, and I will give it to you plain, because you stayed with me this whole way. Getting older does not make you weak. It only makes other people think you are. The day they decide you are done is the day you find out what you are really made of. And being fooled by someone you love is no kind of shame. I trusted my son. That trust was the best thing about me, not the worst. The shame belongs to the one who broke it, never to the one who gave it. I gave my pen away in 4 seconds, grieving and alone, to a boy I had taught to drive a nail. Anybody could have. But when the time came, I picked the pen back up. I did not shout. I did not beg. I stood up in a room full of people who had already decided I was finished, and I signed my own name back to myself. They thought a signature had made me powerless. It turned out to be the most powerful thing I ever signed back, and I would do it the same way again. Calm on paper, standing up. These days you will find me on the porch in the evenings, up on the rise where the valley turns gold. The notebook on my knee, Margaret's photo beside me, the house I built still standing, still mine. If William's story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? I read every one. Like this video and subscribe so you do not miss the next one, linked in the description. About a daughter everyone underestimated until the day she stopped staying quiet. Thank you for sitting with me today.